February in the early 1980s was where Hollywood sent movies to die. 12 films across February, 1982 and 1983 lost studios well over $100 million combined. I've got Francis Ford Coppola here. I've got Martin Scorsese. I've got Disney fumbling around trying to figure out what it even was anymore. And there's one film that made less money than some theater chains spent on popcorn that month. Another one forced a legendary director into a decade of debt and 3 bankruptcies. Which February disaster hurt Hollywood the most? Let's find out. Jon Voight was coming off an Oscar win for Coming Home, but by 1983, his career was stalling hard. Table for Five was his passion project. Voight's own production company financed the thing because no studio wanted to fully back a custody drama about a divorced dad taking his kids on a Mediterranean cruise. The budget was never officially disclosed, but this wasn't cheap. They shot on the MS Vista Fjord, considered the most luxurious cruise ship in the Western Hemisphere. They filmed at the Giza Pyramids. They had Vilmos Zsigmond behind the camera and Michael Kahn in the editing room. Spielberg's people. This had real money behind it. It opened to $148,208. That's not a typo. Total gross was $2.4 million. Warner Brothers and CBS Theatrical Films barely acknowledged it existed. Here's the thing though, this movie had TV movie written all over it. Critics called it soap opera with fancy production values. You'd think the exotic locations would sell it, but audiences saw through the glossy packaging. It felt like a disease of the week special that somehow ended up in theaters. There's one interesting footnote. A young Kevin Costner shows up in a small role as a newlywed on the cruise ship. 5 years later, he'd be one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Table for Five just disappeared. Dudley Moore was supposed to be unstoppable in 1983. Lovesick came right after Arthur made $95 million and won him a Golden Globe. Warner Brothers gave director Marshall Brickman, the guy who co-wrote Annie Hall and Manhattan with Woody Allen, $10.1 million to make a romantic comedy starring Moore as a psychiatrist who falls for his patient. Oh, and Alec Guinness plays the ghost of Sigmund Freud. I'm not making that up. The film grossed $10.17 million domestic. On paper, that looks like it broke even. But after marketing costs and the studio's cut of ticket sales, Warner Brothers lost money. This was a disappointment, not a catastrophe, but it marked the beginning of Moore's rapid decline. You'd think a Woody Allen collaborator directing Dudley Moore with a premise that Weird would find an audience. But critics called it unfocused. One reviewer said it was like Arthur meets Woody Allen, but manages to do neither well. Moore would spend the next several years chasing that Arthur magic and never finding it. The role was originally meant for Peter Sellers. He passed away in 1980 before production could begin. Moore inherited the project, and you can feel it. The material never quite fits him. It's just going to sit in the Warner Brothers catalog forever. Disney in the early 1980s had no idea what it was doing. Night Crossing is proof. The studio spent over $10 million on a true story about 2 East German families escaping the communist regime via homemade hot air balloon. The film grossed $8 million domestic. That's a loss, but not a disaster by normal standards. The real problem was what it represented. Disney was hemorrhaging money trying to figure out adult content. Profits had fallen from $135 million in 1980 to $93 million by 1983. The 1980 SAG strike delayed production by a month, which killed any promotional momentum. By the time Night Crossing finally hit theaters in February 1982, nobody remembered it was coming. Siskel and Ebert gave it what one reviewer called a brutal savaging. They called it saccharine and representative of everything wrong with Disney's identity crisis. Here's what's fascinating, though. Disney paid the real families $55,000 for their story just 3 days after their escape. Ron Miller, Walt's son-in-law and company president, personally pursued the project. He thought it could prove Disney could handle mature themes. It couldn't. Not yet. This was director Delbert Mann's final theatrical film. Disney wouldn't figure out the adult content problem until they created Touchstone Pictures 2 years later. Night Crossing just became another casualty of a studio that had lost its way. Kevin Kline, Angela Lansbury, and Linda Ronstadt starred in The Pirates of Penzance, a $15 million adaptation of the hit Broadway revival. Universal should have had a prestige musical on their hands. Instead, they created one of the most spectacular distribution disasters of the decade. Total gross, $694,497. That's less than 5% of the budget recovered. Opening weekend, only 91 theaters showed it. 91. Here's what happened. Universal decided to simultaneously release the film theatrically and on pay television. This was 1983. Nobody had tried this before. Every major theater chain in America said no. They boycotted the film entirely. One exhibitor told the press he wouldn't have played it if they'd given it to me for nothing. You'd think this killed the movie, but here's the irony. The pay TV broadcast actually outperformed the theatrical release. About 120,000 viewers watched it on subscription services, generating $1.2 million. That's almost double what the theatrical run made. Critics loved it. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 81%. Kevin Kline is genuinely fantastic as the Pirate King. None of that mattered. Universal committed distribution self-harm, and the film paid the price. The studio tried this simultaneous release strategy exactly once. They wouldn't try it again until Trolls World Tour during COVID, nearly 40 years later. Pirates of Penzance was ahead of its time in the worst possible way. Hal Ashby directed Harold and Maude, Shampoo, Coming Home, and Being There. By 1983, he was filming Rolling Stones concerts. Let's Spend the Night Together documented the band's 1981 Tattoo You tour with 20 cameras and 24-track stereo recording. It grossed $3.8 million from 475 theaters. For a Rolling Stones movie, that's embarrassing. The production was troubled from the start. Ashby collapsed during filming in Arizona. His substance issues were escalating. Keith Richards reportedly almost started a fistfight with one of the cinematographers. And then there's the editorial choice that killed any goodwill the film might have had. During Time Is on My Side, Ashby inserted archival footage of burning monks, headless soldiers, and famine victims. Roger Ebert called it disgusting and said the movie hadn't earned the right to exploit those real images. Critics who might have praised the concert footage couldn't get past that decision. This was Ashby's decline made visible. After this came The Slugger's Wife, which he was fired from, and 8 Million Ways to Die, which he was fired from on the final day of photography. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in early 1988. Friends including Warren Beatty, Jack Nicholson, and Jon Voight visited his Malibu home in his final months. He passed away in December 1988 at 59. Let's Spend the Night Together wasn't the cause of his fall, but it documented it in real time. Nick Nolte and Deborah Winger starred in Cannery Row, a Steinbeck adaptation that cost MGM $11.3 million. It grossed $5.3 million. But that's not the story here. Raquel Welch is the story. She was originally cast as the female lead. MGM fired her after 7 days of shooting, claiming she violated her contract by being repeatedly late and insisting on doing hair and makeup at home. They replaced her with Deborah Winger, who was 15 years younger. Welch sued. The trial happened in 1986. She won $10.8 million from a jury of 8 women and 4 men. Here's the kicker. Welch made more money from the lawsuit than MGM made from the entire film. The studio's total losses on Cannery Row hit nearly $16 million. You'd think getting fired from a flop would be humiliating. Variety actually reported that critics felt Welch should feel happy she had been fired from it. The reviews were brutal. Vincent Canby called it precious nonsense. Director David S. Ward had won an Oscar for writing The Sting. After Cannery Row bombed, he was effectively exiled from Hollywood for the rest of the decade. He wouldn't resurface until he wrote Sleepless in Seattle and directed Major League in 1989. One Steinbeck adaptation nearly ended his career. Willie Nelson and Gary Busey made a Western called Barbarossa in 1982. It has a 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Pauline Kael called it the finest Western since The Wild Bunch. It grossed $1.7 million. Budget was somewhere between $10 and $12 million. Universal opened it in just 187 theaters to $285,312. They buried it. Here's why. The film was originally produced by Lord Lou Grade's ITC Entertainment. When ITC collapsed after the Raise the Titanic disaster, Universal inherited Barbarossa in an acquisition. They had no interest in a Western they hadn't developed. The genre was commercially dead. Heaven's Gate had seen to that. You'd think quality would matter. Critics were unanimous. Janet Maslin called it the best Western in a long while. Siskel and Ebert both gave enthusiastic approval. None of it helped. The Western genre wouldn't recover commercially for another decade. The film found its audience on HBO, where it became a genuine cult classic. Willie Nelson considers it one of his best acting roles. Rolling Stone included it among his most memorable performances. But theatrically, Barbarossa was DOA. Universal didn't want it, audiences weren't told about it, and a legitimately great film just evaporated. Making Love was one of the first mainstream Hollywood films to portray a gay relationship sympathetically. 20th Century Fox spent $8 million on production and another $5 million on marketing. It grossed around $6.1 million domestic. 15 actors turned down the lead role before Michael Ontkean accepted. Harrison Ford said no. Michael Douglas said no. William Hurt said no. Their agents told them it would end their careers. They weren't wrong. Harry Hamlin, who took the other male lead, later said, "That was the last studio picture that I ever did. The door shut with a resounding smash." He wouldn't recover until L.A. Law in 1986. Here's the thing that sealed the film's fate. Fox studio head Marvin Davis attended a private screening. According to multiple sources, he stood up and screamed an expletive about the content before storming out of the room. The film was delayed from summer 1981 to the dump months of February 1982. Some audience members booed during screenings, others walked out. Fox ended 1982 with a $16.9 million loss, and Making Love was cited as one of the bombs that contributed. Critics found it boring. Gay audiences were divided. Everyone agreed on one thing: 1982 wasn't ready for this movie. It was simply too early. 10 years after The Sting won Best Picture and made $257 million, Universal released The Sting 2. No Paul Newman, no Robert Redford, no George Roy Hill directing. Jackie Gleason and Mac Davis instead. It grossed $6.3 million. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 10%. The original writer, David S. Ward, actually wrote the sequel, hoping Newman and Redford would return. They were willing to consider it. Newman wanted to leave well enough alone. When the stars passed, Universal recast and pushed forward anyway. You'd think audiences would show up for nostalgia alone. They didn't. One reviewer compared the recasting to the Coy and Vance season of The Dukes of Hazzard. The film opened at number 3, then collapsed. Half its total gross came from opening weekend. It was out of most theaters within 3 weeks. Here's the absurd part. The Sting 2 received an Oscar nomination for Best Musical Score. Somehow, plans for a third Sting film, a prequel about Henry Gondorf's early days, were immediately canceled after this bombed. Some sequels just shouldn't exist. David Cronenberg made Videodrome for $5.9 million. It was his first major studio backing. Universal gave it a wide release in 600 theaters. It grossed $2.1 million and disappeared in about 10 days. Universal's president, Sidney Sheinberg, later admitted he regretted giving it wide release. They didn't know how to market it. The transgressive content defied every category. It wasn't exploitation. It wasn't art house. It was something else entirely. James Woods plays a cable TV programmer who discovers a broadcast signal that causes hallucinations and physical mutations. Debbie Harry plays his girlfriend. Rick Baker created effects so disturbing that Woods swore he'd never do another effects-driven film. Here's what makes this fascinating. Cronenberg turned down the chance to direct Return of the Jedi to make Videodrome instead. He chose body horror over Star Wars. Andy Warhol called it the 1980s answer to A Clockwork Orange. Critics at the time were mixed. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars and called it one of the least entertaining films of all time. Today, Videodrome has an 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. The Criterion Collection released it. It's studied in film schools. Its themes about media addiction, screen obsession, and reality distortion feel prophetic now. In 1983, it was just a weird Canadian horror movie that confused everyone. Time proved Cronenberg right. Francis Ford Coppola made One from the Heart for $26 million. It started as a $2 million romantic comedy. Then Coppola's vision expanded and expanded and expanded. Total gross, $636,796. That's less than 3% of the budget recovered. Paramount was supposed to distribute it. They attended a test screening in August 1981. Exhibitors called it one of the 10 worst movies I've ever seen. Paramount backed out. Columbia stepped in at the last minute. Coppola himself pulled the film after about 2 weeks, convinced industry politics were sabotaging it. His studio, Zoetrope, collapsed. The lot was auctioned off in 1984 for $12.3 million. Coppola filed for bankruptcy 3 times. His debts reached approximately $30 million. He spent the next decade taking for hire directing jobs just to stay solvent. The Outsiders, Rumblefish, The Cotton Club, Peggy Sue Got Married, all of it was driven by financial necessity. You'd think this film must be terrible. It's not. The electronic cinema technology Coppola developed became the foundation of modern pre-visualization. The Tom Waits and Crystal Gale soundtrack earned an Oscar nomination. Cinematographers still study its neon-soaked Las Vegas sets. One from the Heart destroyed its creator financially. It also proved he was decades ahead of his time. That's the Coppola paradox. He was right about everything except the audience's readiness to see it. Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro made The King of Comedy for $19 million. It grossed $2.5 million worldwide. Entertainment Tonight named it the flop of the year on their 1983 New Year's Eve broadcast. Scorsese confirmed this himself years later. De Niro plays Rupert Pupkin, a delusional, aspiring comedian who stalks and eventually abducts talk show host Jerry Langford, played by Jerry Lewis. The film is uncomfortable, cringe-inducing, and brilliant. In 1983, nobody wanted to watch it. De Niro's preparation was extreme even by his standards. He stalked his own autograph hunters to understand fan obsession. He agreed to meet one of his real-life stalkers. He refused dinner invitations from Jerry Lewis to maintain hostility on set. During one scene, he stood off camera hurling insults at Lewis to provoke genuine anger. Sandra Bernhard's performance as a fellow obsessive should have earned an Oscar nomination. Much of her work was improvised. The Village Voice called it her career performance. Here's what happened afterward. The failure strained Scorsese and De Niro's friendship for 6 years. Their next collaboration was Goodfellas in 1990. Today, The King of Comedy has an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes and is considered a Scorsese masterwork. It directly influenced Todd Phillips' Joker in 2019. De Niro even appeared in Joker playing a late-night host, the exact role Jerry Lewis played in the original. He went from obsessive fan to celebrity victim. The King of Comedy was simply too prescient about celebrity worship, parasocial relationships, and media obsession. 1983 audiences weren't equipped to process it. 40 years later, it feels like prophecy. These 12 films mark the death of 1970s auteur cinema. Heaven's Gate had already wounded the model. These February disasters finished it off. Studios stopped trusting directors with blank checks. The blockbuster franchise era had arrived. But here's the thing. Many of these so-called failures are now considered masterworks. Videodrome is in the Criterion Collection. The King of Comedy influenced one of the highest-grossing films of 2019. One from the Heart pioneered technology that every major production uses today. February was where Hollywood buried its mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes were just too early for the audiences they needed.